the GreyHatBeard podcast.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of show 25 of GreyHatBeard, the modern workplace podcast that we talk about all things Microsoft 365. If you haven't listened to part 1, do go back and listen to that, where we talk about the news and ramble on about many things, including lots of outages. But one of the things is, if you don't want outages, you want to get repeated processes that work well. Maybe trying to automate some of your processes. And that's what we're going to be talking about in part 2, is a celebration of automation. We're going to kind of go through three different ways. We're going to start off with why you should automate things. I hope most of you take that for granted and realize that, but we'll try and cover some areas on that. We'll talk about what are the options, what sort of things should you consider. And we'll let Gary and Veronique have a fight over PowerShell versus CLI on that one. And at the end, we'll also talk a little bit about how you can learn more about some of the tools that are available, mostly in the Microsoft space, because anything outside that we don't know much about. So we'll be teaching you things that we don't know about ourselves. So we are going to focus around. Yeah, and they're rubbish as well. Yeah, who'd use any of those? But maybe Veronique, let's ask you to kick it off. Why should we bother automating things and not just sit there and do it all manually?
I think when you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, you really need to, well, we're going to talk about PowerShell. So you need to learn PowerShell. You need to know about, what you can do with PowerShell. We're going to talk later on about, obviously, some other product and services, but I usually do mainly SharePoint for, obviously, using PowerShell and automation. And if you take the example of you have, I don't know, it's Friday 4 o'clock, and then your manager just comes to you and said, oh, I forgot to tell you, but you need to create, I don't know, 100 site collections in SharePoint, for instance. So I know it's just a few clicks to connect, and then you just, give it a name and things like that. But surely you're going to be here until the next morning if you have to create 100. So this piece of automation is just for you to go faster, to be faster. And while you're faster, you're going to spend your time doing something else, which is probably more important than just click, 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 for instance. So
I'd say on a Friday night, I don't know about more important, but probably more alcoholic.
No comment, Kevin. But yeah, I think with everything we've seen for the past few years, anyway, automation is really getting traction, and we see different product, different services, and they are for automating things. It can be a script, it can be processes, it can be some other things. But I think it's there. PowerShell, it's there, and I think it's going to stay there. But you can couple that with different other things, so you can, enhance this, I would say, and take your automation further. But I think it's mandatory to know PowerShell when you're in the Microsoft world. And I mean, I'm not talking about only SharePoint. You have a PowerShell module for every single product out there. Now, they're not all as good as some others, but you have one at least. So I think it's kind of the bare minimum if you want to automate things and not just click, click, click constantly.
So I'll play devil's advocate against PowerShell in a minute and talk about maybe some of the no code, but I think regardless of the tool used, the power of automation is not just you can get things quicker. Absolutely agree. If you've got repetitive processes, you can make them quicker, but you can also make them more stable and repeatable. If you had to go through 100, creating site collections, maybe it's site 1, site 2, site 3, by about site 70 or 80, you could start missing numbers. By automating that, you can guarantee that those things, for the most part, depending if you're using the Microsoft Graph or not, have actually worked consistently, and you're going to get that consistent view. And even if you have some risk that maybe some of those calls haven't worked, you can put logging around it, you can put validation, you can build all these into your automation to get those repetitive processes and have more confidence that things have actually worked than you would in a manual process as well. So I think that repetition, that making things easier, but it also makes it more repeatable and I was going to say safer, but more guaranteed by automating that on top of that.
I think the other thing is you got to remember that everything that we do with the UI isn't necessarily everything that you can do.
You mean the admin centers are not fully featured?
There may be features that aren't exposed in the UI. Yes, yeah. So therefore, you can do more things if you are, the lower down you get in terms of getting into the code, getting into, whether it's CLI or PowerShell, you can do more things. And very often you can do more things because you can chain those together rather than, I think about the sort of the, if you look at creating a team, if you go to PowerShell with 3 commands, you can do what you can't do within the 17 different interfaces that you need to go through across, Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, and it just makes life easier. You can get more done more quickly. So as well as being able to make it repeatable, it actually gives you more flexibility and capability as well at times.
And sometimes you just don't have the choice, because I can remember maybe last year or a couple of years ago when you wanted to register a hub site, you could not do it with the UI. You had to go. It was a single command just for doing that for one site, for instance, which defied the purpose of PowerShell. Obviously, you don't want to do things for just one site, for instance, but you had no choice because it was not in the UI.
It's still the case of site designs. You can't put site designs through UI either. That has to go through script. So yeah, I think it's a really good point, Al. I think the other one is deployments. For those who remember those days of kind of being a dev, developing all your stuff and then going over to put it into the UAT or hope for a pre-UAT QA environment. You write out all the detailed steps which you hadn't written down the first time because you forgot about it, and you try and work out what it is, and then you try and deploy it, realize all the things you've missed, and you hand it over to someone in UAT, that big document. They go through it, miss all the steps, and then blame you for things not working. Then it goes to prod, which back in those days would have been 4 o'clock on a Friday night. It all goes wrong. Your weekend's completely wasted. Now you can script up those deployments. You can have that automation of it where you're almost developing it as you go along, and you then hand that over, and you know that same thing's going to happen in every environment. Al's got his hand up, so he's either going to deny it or...
No. So what I was going to say is, organizations have been doing that for a long time. Very, very. I remember, I don't even want to say when this was, but let's put it this way. It wasn't this century. Scripting out deployments, pulling everything out of source control, scripting it up, completely fresh environment, deploying it. We couldn't get stuff deployed unless we had all of that done.
Absolutely.
And I think it's
lots of people haven't as well, sadly, still.
Yeah. I think what all of these,
some places.
What all of these tools give us is an easier, more flexible way to do that. It's been around forever. It's just that most people haven't been disciplined enough. And I think this is where, the types of automation that are available, deployments is one thing. We've got pipelines that, platforms that are designed to allow us to do this stuff.
And I think the trust for infrastructure teams to support that is built out before. I think certainly if I look in the 2000s, the early 2000s, there wasn't that confidence at running scripts. People would expect to do things, certainly in the Windows space, maybe less so in the well, I was about to say Linux, but no, would it be more Unix back then? Yeah, yes. There was more confidence in running scripts and things, but people would want to run a script and then run another one and put parameters in. That confidence of having pipelines to do that has built as well.
I think that word that you just said there, confidence, is what automation gives you. That's it, it's confidence and it's resilience. If you have something scripted, you can test that script. So you can test the script for your actual deployments, right? So that's something there. You can see it. It's documented as well. So you've got an idea. It's not just running through all the different steps in a document. It's the actual code that's going to run. And the one thing that we've not mentioned is time to recovery. What about disaster recovery? If your systems go, how long does it take you to get your systems back up to speed? And can they be exactly the same as you left them? It's similar for like laptops. Think about if your laptop blew up now, how long would it take you to get everything back together? You can script that. You can get everything together, rerun that, you're back in business and you've not got a problem. You just go to the shop, hopefully it's got a big apple above it, and you buy your nice shiny M1 machine. Touche.
Go to a shop. What's that?
For businesses, that is a big thing, right? That I don't think necessarily gets talked about in the same lines as automation. And I think you're talking about, we're getting into a bit of a DevOps kind of approach here. Is that that automation, if you're doing something, you're building out those 100 sites or whatever, or deploying your app, you can script that, you can put it in a pipeline. The next person that comes along doesn't even have to think about what the deployment steps are. They can just write whatever code that needs to execute in that environment, and it will run and it will execute. And automation allows you to do that. It allows you to start doing 100 sites, then it allows you to extend, do 100 sites, and then a little bit more, and it just keeps rolling on, and you're saving time as you go along and building that resilience. So yeah, I think that automation really is that, irrespective of whether you're using a CLI, whether you're using PowerShell or on Linux or whatever operating system. It's agnostic.
Just a quick one when you're talking about scripting up when your laptop blows out. Big shout out to Damien Berry, very related, because his laptop literally blew out. He had flames coming out the side. Did he stop? No, he finished his migration script and then turned his laptop off. That is dedication to scripting and automation. So thank you for that dedication on that one, Damien. I would say one caveat to automation. I think it was very good what you mentioned there about testing, Gary. Absolutely, you can test these. You can make sure they work in that repeatable way, which you need to do, because if you get something wrong when you're manually creating 100 sites, you'll probably realize about 5 or 6 in there that you forgot to put a prefix on there. And yes, you need to go back and do that. If you haven't, you've got a hell of a lot of wasted time, admittedly, which is bad. But if you've got 100 sites, or say 62,000 lists that you need to update, and you forget to put that thing in the beginning, it's going to carry on for quite a long time before you realize that. So do make sure you test, do make sure you're diligent with your tests as well.
I feel like every time you speak, it's like from experience. It comes very, naturally somehow.
Absolutely no way I did that this weekend. There is no way I did that whatsoever. Sorry, Al, you had a comment.
Coming from a SQL background, always put the where clause in. always make sure that you have your control to say, only do this a few times to start with, and then ramp it up.
Yeah, because you don't really get with PowerShell or CLI the transactions, do you? That would be nice for some scripts, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because
that sounds like a good infinite loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. While 1 equals 1.
Oh, there it goes.
But I think that's a key thing. If you're doing, because I think automation, there's different flavors of automation, aren't there? There are the things that happen where you've got to repeat it a lot of times and do the same thing many times. And then there are the things that you're going to be asked to carry out many instances of that. And where you've got that scale, yeah, putting that limitation in there is key, so that you're saying, actually, because we've probably all seen where, you have some kind of memory leak and you leave it to run over the weekend and flames start coming out of the server. So being able to ramp up and measure, how long things are going to take is actually really important to do. And that's really quite different from, I'm going to be submitting a document every week and one task is going to run and one process is going to run. So I think there's really a lot of different types of automation that we could address, because not all of it is just about scale. It is all about repeatability, though.
Yeah, and I think on that, we've talked a lot about CLI and PowerShell, and I think that is the focus of what we're talking about here. But there are no-code solutions. Power Automate if it's even got it in the name. There is something that you can use to run on a trigger. An event happens, or you can trigger manually. It will do things on a repeated basis. Within Power Automate, there's a robotic process automation. So where you can't script things because you've got such a hideous legacy app like the Microsoft Calculator that you need to click on buttons on the screen as a demo, you can actually build those up. I know I'm joking aside about the calculator. There are plenty of organizations with very old apps that have no APIs, that have no way to plug into that. You now have robotic process automation that can actually replicate that. And you can have non-technical users who can start to build up some of their repeated scripts. Now, I came from financial services, and it was massive there because there were these operations teams who would manually key in huge amounts. And they're just confident of having a script doing a similar thing. They just didn't trust. Whereas if they could say, I click here and that will click there, it built in their confidence. And you could use virtual servers to scale this out to quite a large degree for some legacy applications. And there's a good reason. It's a big market in RPA as well. So it's not just about scripting from there. It can be about that UI sense as well.
I just shudder when I hear this, though, because I just know that someone out there is using RPA to keep an Access database alive.
You can use Power Platform for that.
That is true. Yeah.
No, and it's true. And for the most part, you should be looking to upgrade those processes. But I've seen many. You do a cost benefit of upgrading this massive system to a newer version that's got an API versus that one little thing you want to get automated. Yes, hopefully there are some sensible conversations going around that, but it is still automation. And the more you can automate that, the more likely you can get some definition of what API should exist to do the same thing, the better as well. Everyone's pulling faces at me. I feel like the bad guy talking about RPA. It's a multi-billion-pound industry.
There's the technical debt that I feel right now of just all these systems, and it feels like there's genuine reasons. I definitely get that, right? But yeah. I just look at it that it's a potentially expensive, easy way out of not tackling what has been a problem that has probably just been sat there for years and no one's thought about dealing with it, and they'll just go, no, we'll carry on. That's the danger, I think.
Yeah.
And that it's going to potentially push some organizations down a route of keeping those unsupported systems. We've talked about security and the SolarWinds attack and everything, and if you're using up-to-date things and you can still get attacked, then there'll be plenty of holes in those old systems that will not be able to be filled. So yeah, sure. That's my worry about that. But yeah, I do get it that obviously it's quite important in some cases.
Sorry, Veronique.
I think you have different. Yeah, I just want to say I think you have different. Different product. I appreciate we're talking about CLI and PowerShell here, and when we talk about the different services that you have, like Power Automate, Azure Functions, and things like that, they have a different audience, right?
Yeah.
So, and they are used for a specific purpose because, and logic apps as well. I forgot about logic apps. And so, if I need to do something that would enhance my automation, that's the common goal, automation. And all of those, they automate something, but they're not for everybody and they cannot do everything. So if I want to automate my script, for instance, my PowerShell script, well, Power Automate is not the tool I'm going to use. So I'm not going to use this. I'm going to go for an Azure function. So this is just, but I'm still using PowerShell in that case. So you see, it's not as if they are like good for something and not good for others somehow, but they have a different audience. I wouldn't see like an end user going for logic apps. I wouldn't see, an admin going for probably logic apps or an Azure function if I really, go that road. So it's going to be pretty difficult. So they're here and that's good, but they have a different audience.
I think that's one of the challenging things is that there are so many different options. You know, Microsoft are very generous, aren't they? They never give us one thing that'll do everything. They give us 17 things that'll each do something. And I think there are certain scenarios where you look at it and you go, well, actually, that's the only option that I have available. So how do I overcome some of the shortcomings? You know, so Azure Security
like
Center,
the site designs, yeah.
Well,
You
yeah.
have to
I mean,
use
I was thinking
PowerShell,
of Azure Security Center. You use Logic Apps. So therefore, you know, if I want to do something that I can't do in Logic Apps, what do I then have to trigger? And we often see it with Flow. Oh, I can't do everything I need to do. How do I trigger a runbook that'll execute some PowerShell, you know, because I've got more flexibility. And I think that's part of the challenge that we come across as consultants, identifying the right tool in the scenario that we're dealing with.
And I think Veronique had a great point there. A lot of it will be about audience. It will be about what they can do, what they understand. If two tools are fairly similar, then you want to go the one that the people are going to continue using it will have the most comfort with. So I think there's yeah, exactly. And I think if people don't have scripting skills, then things like the RPA and the Power Automate to come in. I want to see someone looking at that to make sure that they were keeping it going on there. But if someone's got to script up 100 site collections and they've got a choice, and I'm going to let Veronique go first in this one, they could use PowerShell or they could use the CLI for Microsoft 365. What sort of things would they consider? Veronique first as the guest.
Yeah, so again, this is a different audience. And I spoke to Gary about that like maybe last year or something like that. And the fact that now PowerShell is cross-platform, I can dust off my Mac that I have in here because I was not using it before. So I'm going to use my Mac and I'm going to be able to run PowerShell for SharePoint. So that's a good thing because I know PowerShell, I know the syntax. If I go into the CLI, I don't know the syntax. And maybe I don't want to learn the new syntax now because I have some other things to learn before, you know what I mean? So I think it's a different audience. The CLI was there before PowerShell being on PowerShell Core. So people probably had time to do it. I think it's more developer oriented probably. But for me, it's PowerShell. I'm happy that SharePoint is on PowerShell Core as well now, but I don't want to fight with Gary.
There's no fights happening. I mean, to kind of from our standpoint in the CLI, you know, you can use PowerShell with the CLI. It's different. So you know, PMP PowerShell it's PowerShell only, right? That is the shell that you're going to use. That's the structure, the modules, everything is defined. And if you've come from that background, you know, like Veronique said, you already know it. Therefore, go and use it, right? What we're finding, in certainly the CLI, is that you know we're not aiming at a particular shell. So if you're a Unix, Linux admin, you know Bash and you know you've got amazing grep skills and you're using Awk and you've got all these tools that you've used for years.
We've
that
lost
have been around
at least 2/3 of the audience at this point. But do go on. We get where
But
you're
the
going.
point is, the cloud is not Windows and it's not Microsoft anymore. The cloud is open. It is Linux. A lot of Linux operating systems, are out there being used. It's higher than Windows. This is, Microsoft have joined the Linux Foundation. They're helping promote Linux and using it in a lot of places as well. And there's a lot of people out there with those skills. And we looked at it from that point of view of, if you didn't know PowerShell and you didn't want to use PowerShell, you had no option really in the 365 space. And as development has moved away from, let's say, Microsoft tools, usually we still use C# and things, but SharePoint framework, from the SharePoint development perspective, even Teams development, because that's using SharePoint framework, has moved to open source, moved to node based, which has got a big following of developers on Macs and on Linux as well. So you had this problem of people developing on other operating systems and not having the tools to be able to deploy apps or turn on a setting. The very first command was just simply turning on the Office 365 CDN. You couldn't do that without, you know, creating a VM and running Windows and running PowerShell on that. So, you know, that's the angle that we come from, the CLI. You know, we see a lot of people using PowerShell with the CLI. You know, it's not one or the other. It's whatever you need. You know, people use whatever tool they need because it gives them value. And if that gives you value, you keep using it. And PowerShell is great. You know, I like PowerShell over Bash, but I like using CLI as well. I like using the Azure CLI because it gives me a different experience, but I will use that with PowerShell. So, you know, people have different needs. And I think that, you know, the more tools we have taking a different approach, you have more options, which is, you know, better for all of us. And it's the goal of making sure that, you know, people on different platforms are able to automate, right? With whatever tool set they choose. Because at the end of the day, it's just calling an API in a data center when we get down to it.
So I think certainly when we're talking about the SharePoint connecting to there, you've got two options. Generally, it's the one you're going to be most comfortable with. Both of them work very well. I throw in a couple of things. I think some great things that PnP PowerShell does and some great things that CLI do that are specific to those. I think with the, say if you're a developer, if you're looking at SharePoint framework, being up to greatest versions, you're going down the CLI routes to do that. And there's some very, I think quite a lot of reporting stuff that you have within CLI that's is very specific to that, which are great. And I think there's a few other bits that, again, can't think of one. Provisioning is a great example that is only there in PnP PowerShell. So that ability to provision from templates, you're going down the PnP PowerShell route. I think there's a slight different one other consideration I've hit with it is how you get the authentication. So you've got I'm slightly behind on the PowerShell 7 versions of it, but generally, if you're using CLI, you've got to have an admin to grant you access to that. Whereas with the PnP PowerShell, you can do more things through your own permissions without having to be granted an app registration. So there is a bit of consideration for that. If you're someone who just wants to go and do what you could do from the UI, there is a bit more of an option with PowerShell. It's certainly something I tried going down the CLI, one of the first ones I wanted to, and our client, we didn't have anyone there who had admin access, so we backed away from that for a while. So that for me is one of the big considerations between the two.
But you also have some differences with the PnP PowerShell if you're on Windows PowerShell Core or if you're on the Mac. So it's also different. And I think from what I understand, the underlying is completely different for the CLI where it really doesn't matter. Is that correct, Gary? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the methods that we use to authenticate are different. So CLI was built with Azure AD authentication in mind right from the off, so that we could go cross sites without having to re-authenticate, things like that. You know, PnP PowerShell, you've got CSOM there, you've got the context of the sites that gives you, you know, benefits. And this is the thing, right? It's looking at the tools and saying, well, what's right for my scenario?
Yeah.
Because we offer different things. You know, there's a whole host of other options in the CLI. Azure Managed Identity, one of them. You know, we've got that plugged in. Certificate authentication is there, and it's just, you know, one of the things is that you've got all these options. I like to think that, you know, it's there and it's made as easy as possible for people to get up to speed with, and that we're exposing people to using other methods of authentication as well. I think when you talk about certificates, a lot of people go, "Oh, that sounds really," but yeah, exactly. it's painful, but it is.
You have to remember to redo those.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, don't.
But it's something that you need to understand, right? You need to understand how that works.
If you do forget your certificates, don't forget you can automate reminders for those using either PowerShell or the CLI. So.
Or use Azure Managed Identity
exactly.
And just
you
know, get around.
But I think that's a key thing, though. You know, the authentication has always been a really fun journey with PowerShell, where you've got so many different ways to authenticate, and then you've got MFA thrown in for, you know, the fun and games of being able to authenticate with some libraries. You can, some you can't, and it's simplifying that is great, but understanding actually, you know, what authority do you actually need to be able to set that up? As you said, Kevin, if you don't have access to it, but just simplifying that one thing is a massive advantage for a lot of people, but it might not be right for the casual scripter. You know, the accidental automator may not want to get into managed identity, because that would be, you know, too devy.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about the casual scripter. We'll come in very shortly about how you can learn more about these. One thing that Gary taught me actually about this, a good reason, because I'm sure many people listen to this who have done scripting, especially in the PowerShell, do it on Windows, and don't really see the point of this cross-platform lovey-dovey is just to keep the Linux and Apple people happy. I was certainly in that camp for quite a long time. So one of the big things that Gary taught me is if you're doing pipelines, doing deployments, if you run your same scripts, especially things like SharePoint Framework and others, they run far faster in Ubuntu and on Macs and things like that. So use your same script when you're doing your pipeline. Select Ubuntu instead of Windows, and you'll find your pipelines suddenly run a lot quicker. If that's not a good reason to think about getting that cross-platform to make your pipelines run quicker, then I don't know what is.
Time is money, right? The longer things run, the more expensive they are. The faster you can get them running, then everyone benefits. And you know, over time, we're talking about automation, right? So that script that you've just written that does one job, that then, you know, we'll add more bits, and before you know it, you've got a 5-minute process on your hands.
Absolutely.
And you know, yes, it's doing great value, but you're having to wait. If you can shave time off that, then you know, that's you're going to start to benefit again. It's very usual, like we talked about with the RPA, to keep your systems there and have technical debt. You can still get technical debt in your scripts as well.
Absolutely.
So to combat that, try anything.
So as Veronique went first on talking about the two scripts, Gary, how do we learn more about the CLI from Microsoft 365?
Well, I guess the first place is look at the website. So it's pnp.github.io/CLI-Microsoft 365. We do have a short link though. I think it's aka.ms/CLI-M365. That's quicker. But yeah, if you head over to the website, you know, all our documentation on there about all the commands, how to get up to speed, how to install it. You know, if you do want to quickly just kind of use it, I definitely recommend trying the Docker approach, because it's very simple. You just have to run one command and it will do everything for you. But take a look on there. We've got sample scripts as well. So we provide scenarios of real world scripts that people of the community have created and submitted. So we have some examples there of using the CLI with Bash and with PowerShell to achieve the you know, the scenario, the outcomes that you need. And we're on GitHub. We've got GitHub discussions. If you have an idea, you know, there's something that you just can't find a module to automate something, then, you know, raise an issue in the discussions. Let's have a chat about it, and I'm sure we'll be able to help you out.
It's good to see a whale just above your head there, Gary.
Yes.
And Veronique, if people want to learn more about PowerShell.
If you go to the GitHub repo, so there's the new one now, which is the PNP PowerShell, PNP/PowerShell, I think, which is the new one for PowerShell core. And we're the same. We have discussions. You have the changelog is important as well. Because there's a lot of commands added, removed, renamed, things like that. So this is an explanation as well, which is very important with the new PowerShell for PNP. It will only be supported for SharePoint Online, and it will not be supported for SharePoint On-Prem like the other one. So when this one, the new one, is going GA, then the other one will be archived. So what that means is that it will still be available, but nobody's going to work on it. So you can still use it if you want to, but there will be no new features, no new comments, no nothing. So it's better to start with the new one right now.
That's really interesting. On that, you just mentioned it. It's open source, right? Someone could fork that and carry it on, keep maintaining it.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's just like it's too much work to have every the new PowerShell on PowerShell Core and the other one, the other three, 4 even SharePoint Online 2013, 16, and 19. It's just too much work to maintain. So you just had to make a decision. But yeah, I mean, it'll still be available. Like you said, somebody can fork it and work on it. And Microsoft could, allocate some resources on it. I don't know,
Sorry. Did that out loud, didn't I? I think one of the things I love about PnP PowerShell it is all the commandlet documentation, and this is all on docs.microsoft.com as well, isn't it? In terms of accessing these, so they're very transparent. I know if I'm ever have an issue, if I either Google or Bing for those, it comes up with the docs.microsoft.com with the full details of all those commands. So
yeah,
plenty
and you have to be careful, because if you just go on Google and you start Googling a command there, you're probably going to be redirected to the old module. So the SharePoint Online PnP something. And so some commands obviously have been renamed, but some have new parameters, things like that. So at least if you go on those ones, just make sure that you look at what it applies. So if you see SharePoint 2013 and so on, that's not the right one.
So sorry to drop you in this, but if you wanted a guide on what's changed, is there an article on that?
You have the changelog. The issue, if you go back to the GitHub repo, and you have, even at the top, you see you have the changelog just next to it, and then you have the changelog.md.
Sorry, there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's back. Normally it's back. Yeah, because there was an issue yesterday or a couple of days ago on GitHub, but I can see that he's put everything back. The other thing I want to mention there is the new PnP batch command, because we were talking about performance as well. So the new PnP batch is, for now, it's only on the add PnP list item and set PnP list item. And so what it does, it's going to create the items, let's say 100 or 1,000 in just a couple of seconds instead of a minute, for instance. So yeah, this one is very good. So it's only for those two commands at the minute. I can see at the top, it's also for the remove, but it's probably going to be added to some other commands as well.
If you could do that for set PnP list, that would really help last weekend with that script that I did wrongly. That's yeah. Yeah, I might have looked at that. So, and again, this is open source, so people can contribute to this as well.
Yeah, the changelog is important.
So this will give a change log of what's changed in the PnP PowerShell in terms of the differences between the previous PnP PowerShell and the kind of cross-platform one. Is there a good article that outlines those? I thought I remember seeing one. I can't remember where it was now.
So if you go into where you were before, where you have all the commands, and then at the top you have changelog, and then somehow you get it's just sending back you to here. Okay.
We'll try and find out and add to the show notes, because I'm pretty sure there was a good description of things where some of the commands have changed, because there are definitely some differences in my view, definitely for the better, but it'll be.
But even if you scroll down, it's probably what you're looking for. It's just a different format, but you see. Okay.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
so yeah, for example, add PnP client page is changed to add PnP page. So the changelog is the place to go to for the summary of those.
Definitely.
Which is great. no, really, really useful to have that, because there are definitely some differences, especially around P&P provisioning. I know that caught me out initially, so have a check through that change log and see the details there. In terms of PowerShell generally, you also mentioned that there's Microsoft Learn has got some good courses on there about just generally learning about PowerShell, so not about the P&P side. And Veronique, you mentioned to us earlier to have a look at the docs.microsoft.com, the general PowerShell documentation there. And I love the fact it talks about PowerShell and PowerShell 5.1, i.e. the older one. So it's very much about the cross-platform version.
Yeah, I think this resource is actually good. Now there's probably a section at the top right, you have sample scripts. Now,
oh, sorry, that one.
Yeah, it's the same. I don't think the filtering is working very good, to be honest. But just something to be aware of. But that would be the new repository in here for all. I think what's coming from TechNet, because obviously it's been deprecated for a few months now. But those are really the docs.microsoft.com are really good resources, and I think the PowerShell course learning path is kind of new as well, and trying to replicate what has been done for some other learning paths like the Power Platform or Azure, for instance, which I think it's a good thing. So it means it's here to stay.
Absolutely. So yeah, get learning on that. And there's also, we'll put some links to the show notes for those that want to learn more about Power Automate or Azure Logic Apps, alternative ways to things there. I'm not going to upset the rest of them by suggesting there might be some things about robotic process automation in there, but you can learn more about that within Power Automate as well. And there are other great tools like Blue Prism and others out there. But yeah, stick to scripting for now. Good chance to learn.
Write some code. That's where you can.
Is scripting code? Oh, there's another show in itself.
Yes,
Yeah.
if it lives it well. All of it should live in source control, therefore I'm going to go with, yeah, it is.
A good point.
Script with Alan and Co.
Oh. I was going to say,
That's
Logic apps should have ARM templates that live in source control, as should flows, really.
I've got a good blog post about that somewhere. How you keep your flows.
Everything should be in source control, let's face it.
Absolutely. We are all backed up and branched occasionally, so yeah, you can get a previous version of us. There's one of me with less of a belly from many years ago. So
pre-lockdown.
Exactly. Many lockdowns. Lovely. I think at this stage it's probably time for Al's stomach to be allowed to stop rumbling and get some dinner, and us to let you get on with the rest of your day. So thank you very much, Veronique, for joining us for that chat and letting us allow you and Gary to, well, I tried to get you to fight, but you just agree with each other far too much, which was probably far nicer to listen to, but we'll save the punching for face-to-face.
I think it's one of those things, like we've just had a chat about, two open source tools that have all been built by community members in people's spare time, and these are tools that people are using and companies are using to automate parts of their business, and certainly in P&P PowerShell the numbers of requests that go through the modules that it uses is just off the charts. Like we're into billions of requests, and that's something to keep in mind as well with the automation and the scripting and these modules. They are not just people tinkering with them. They are part of they're running companies in some cases.
Yes.
So that's something to ponder on.
Yeah, but if you want to learn and get involved. So,
I think just on that though, learning these, you won't go wrong learning either of these, because they are valuable skills that are portable between organisations. They're not niche skills anymore.
Yeah,
and they haven't. Certainly, the P&P PowerShell hasn't been for the last 5 years. It's been a mainstream skill.
And it's quite interesting that we've effectively created two libraries to do two different things. So if you want to find out how to do something in CSON, go look at the code for PnP PowerShell. You want to find out how to do something with a REST API, look at the code for the CLI. Two completely different approaches, solving the same problems, calling the same APIs in different places, but it's almost like a library of how to call 365 services.
And if you want to circumvent the documented APIs, go and have a look at the CLI.
Yes, there are some. Yes, but it's okay.
Pages. Right, on that note, we're getting far too silly. So thank you very much, Veronique, for joining us. We will be back in a couple of weeks' time. I'm hoping soon to share my little Dataverse app I've been working on to try and organise ourselves better with our guests and invites, and might even get you guys to put your links in a little bit earlier than just before the show, but yeah, probably not. You can't do everything with automation, I think, is the answer to that one. So we will be automating the guest invite and hopefully improve a little bit on that, but more to come on that. Otherwise, have a fabulous start to 2021. I hope things improve across the world and for everyone, and you're all getting back into work without it being too painful. I've been Grey.
I've been Hat.
I've been Beard.
Thanks very much. See you in a couple of weeks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to GreyHatBeard podcast. The song Drink Up Me Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.